Thank you. Good evening and welcome to today's meeting of the Joint Public Protection Committee. I'm Councillor John Harrison, the Chairman of the committee. The other committee members in attendance are Councillor John Porter from Bracknell Forest Council, Councillor Hilary Cole and Rick Jones from West Berkshire Council, and Councillors Bill Soane and Barry Patman from Woking Borough Council. We're being supported by a number of officers from the three authorities, including from the Public Protection Partnership. They're in attendance either in person or remotely. Before we start proceedings, I'd like to explain, for the benefit of members of the public who may be watching, that tonight's meeting has been held both over Zoom and with councillors present and COVID compliant in the council chamber. I can confirm that those present in the chamber are sitting social distance and thus permitted to remove their face masks while seated. The meeting has been live streamed on YouTube, so members of the public are able to follow proceedings. Do members have any questions about the way in this meeting will be conducted before we proceed? Okay, do we have any apologies for absence?
I've received one apology from Eric Owens, the West Berkshire Council Service Director for Development and Regulation.
Thank you. Are members willing to accept the minutes of the previous meeting as an accurate record? Right, I will propose that. Do I have a seconder? Please. Thank you, Councillor Cole. Can members indicate by raising their hand that they agree that the minutes be signed as a true and accurate record? Any opposed? Thank you all. Do we have any declarations of interest in advance?
None have been notified any in advance.
Should any members find themselves aware that they have a declaration of interest they need to make on a particular item, please make that noted during the meeting. We have no public questions received which relate to the work of the PPP or to an item on the agenda. So we move on to note future items for the committee. Do members and officers have any additional changes that need to be made?
Chairman, just to say that for the meeting, for the December meeting, the CCTV and REPA items will be combined into a single item entitled the Public Protection Surveillance Approach. And also we will be bringing back the air quality report for Bracknell, which we have not received back from DEFRA, to the next meeting as well.
Thank you very much. Simplification, I like it. So item 6 is the Public Protection Partnership Food and Fees Plan, page 17 onwards on the agenda. Rosalind Gator.
Chair, if I may, I was going to start the introduction to this and Rosalind was going to pick up on some of the technical detail. So just by way of background, members will be aware that the councils that form the Public Protection Partnership have a significant role to play in the protection of the food chain. And that includes everything from the rearing of animals on farms to the feeding of those animals, all the way through basically to food safety and food hygiene at premises, and then other areas such as food standards, which includes things like quality, descriptions, claims and labelling of food. So that could be anything from a claim about the nutritional value of the food to the fact that it's organic. And at every step of the way, the councils play a role in the monitoring of that. Now, the work of many of the staff that have conducted these functions over the last kind of 18, 20 months has been dominated by the response to the coronavirus pandemic. And that's included things like compliance work, so effectively inspecting premises to make sure that they had proper COVID controls in through the various kind of stages of restrictions, and also dealing with outbreaks and to some degree basically local contract tracing work, which we've conducted for all three authorities at weekends and West Berkshire during the week under separate arrangements. The trading standards side of the service that would normally deal with the animal health and welfare work and the animal feed work and food standards work has been basically, their area has been dominated by work with relation to COVID enforcement. And when I talk about enforcement and enforcement work, I'm talking about complaints about, for example, premises that shouldn't have been open, that were open and that type of thing. And over that period, the service dealt with around about 2,000 additional COVID-related inquiries. So the timeline of the service's response to COVID is actually set out in the recovery plan that's before the committee tonight. I just thought it would be helpful to just give that bit of background because obviously when we talk about recovery and the scale of the challenges we face around recovery in relation to food work, that the background is very, very important. Particularly, so just a bit more detail on that. We stopped doing routine inspection work back in February 2020 before the first lockdown because it was obvious by then that the risks from going to premise were too high and there was a risk caused by that. And therefore the 2019-20 programme was never finished, although we are now completing all of those outstanding visits going forward. Since then, the Food Standards Agency, which set the framework under which local authority work relating to food is carried out, whether it's to do with animal feed or whether it's to do with food safety or food standards, provide comprehensive guidance to local authorities about how they should prioritise that work. And in particular, they have set out a framework for recovery which takes us through to March 2023. So conscious of the fact that basically, obviously under the current arrangements that we have, Woking will be leaving the partnership at the end of March 2022. So this will only apply basically up until that time. And then obviously Woking will set their own arrangements just for the members for Wokingham, to explain that. So at this stage, Chair, if I may, I would invite Rosalind now to just talk a little bit about the approach that we are taking to recovery as is set out in the plan. So if I can hand over to Rosalind, Chair, if that's okay.
Thanks. Good evening. Thank you, Sean. Yeah, a first stage in what we're trying to do at the minute is to do with data cleansing of the three databases that we hold for food premises. That's well underway at the minute. There was some grant funding available from the FSA, which we applied for and were successful in getting. Now, what we're trying to do with that is we're looking at the very many premises, particularly home caterers that opened during the pandemic. What we want to see is, have they remained open? If they have, when are they actually going to start preparing food so that we can start to do the inspections? We're also looking at what their risk is so that we can prioritise the high risk premises for visits. Prioritisation on the inspections that we're doing is based on the higher risk premises. So that would be our A-rated premises and B-rated premises. As I say, we're concentrating on those, and also, as we mentioned before, on the unrated premises, which are our new premises. For those ones, again, we're concentrating on the higher risk, the commercial premises, the ones that are possibly doing something that's a higher risk type of process. All the figures is set out in the recovery plan, as Sean mentioned. It gives the details of what's due and what's still to be done in the plan. And again, we're following, as Sean says, we're following the recovery plan that the Food Standards Agency have set out for us. Obviously, where we can work through those higher risk premises, we'll start to conduct inspections of the lower risk premises as well, the lower risk inspection profiles. Again, we're working through that with using some contractors that we've been able to bring in, and we're also some officers are working out of hours on trying to get these inspections back up and running again. We're also doing some work with low risk inspection premises, our lowest risk, because we can do those with the code of practice. We can do those in an alternative fashion than visiting. So we're using alternative enforcement strategies with those, which is essentially a questionnaire that we can send out. They fill it in and send it back, and we assess the risk from that. So we're starting that, as I say, because we can do that without actually visiting. with all of this, there's significant risks to this delivery and the recovery plan that we've set out, mainly in the guise of COVID. We've also got vacancies that we're running with, and it's the ability that we have to engage suitably qualified agency and temporary staff. There's nationwide, there is, we've got a dearth of fully qualified officers that can do food, because a lot of them are working on COVID work. So we've been trying for most of the year to bring in contractors. We've been able to bring in some, but if we had more, or if we could bring in more, we could do some more of the food work. All of the officers that we have involved in this food recovery plan, they work in addition to food, they're working in COVID, but they're also involved in other areas of work, such as health and safety investigations, or their trading standards investigations, or other such work. And what we're seeking is the consideration of the committee this evening for the proposed recovery plan. Sean, if you want to come in on that.
Yeah, so effectively, this is what we're proposing tonight, is the approach that we take to recovery. As Rosalind has just explained, the prioritisation of that approach. It is going to take some time to do. We had many hundreds of premises registered just in lockdown alone, just in the kind of period that we're still trying to work through. What I would say, just in addition to what Rosalind has said, is that we are continuing to do other areas of work, such as food sampling in support of the food standards work that we do. So we are actually carrying out samples of food and sending those off for analysis in accordance with the code of practice as part of kind of national and regional projects around that. As Rosalind said, we're also looking to draw down funding where we can to support some of that work. And but it is going to take basically some time. There are still some significant risks, particularly if there was any change to the regulations or controls around COVID, and that would bring us back into the compliance and enforcement world where we were previously. For example, if Plan B was to be instigated. I mean, at the moment, there's no indication of that, but just to flag that as a risk. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. I'd like to invite any member who has questions on the report to raise their hands and raise their virtual hands if they like. Councillor Soane.
Thank you. Just a question. Prior to April 22, will our officers receive historic records of some of the premises that you're talking about, so that we have some idea of where we are going and what we should be expecting to see?
Absolutely, and we are in discussions already. So we've spoken to your project lead, David, about food, and Stephen Brown, who's on the call tonight. We will make sure that we hand over with a very, very clear picture, basically, of where we are. But our plan is to do everything that is required of us by the recovery plan set out by the FSA and before the committee tonight, and certainly to ensure that anything prior to the 1st of April 2020, that basically that programme that wasn't completed is completed for Wokingham as well. Councillor Soane.
Thank you very much.
Are there any other questions or points people would like to raise on the report? I don't see any hands up. So the recommendations on page 17 are that we note the work carried out by these teams, and I'd like to say thank you and very well done for the way that's going on. And two other points, which are to approve the plans as set out in the report. I will propose that. Do I have a seconder? Okay, would members please indicate by raising their hands or their virtual hands if they would like to support that? Then that appears to be carried. Thank you very much. Next item, item 7, is on an update on the reconfiguration of the services, including governance arrangements.
Good evening, Chair. I'll just take you through the outline of the report and to pick up on a couple of pieces that I think, pieces of information I think are particularly pertinent for committee to be aware of. So obviously this is follow up from a series of reports that have been written through for the committee and for the constituent partner authorities and their governance processes. And this catches us up on where we've got to with that, and also to identify and clarify the important role that the Joint Management Board has, which is obviously the officer group that feeds into this committee, about how it identifies risks for the PPP, how it manages them, and then how the proposed future arrangements, the traded services that we've been discussing over the last few months, how we propose those management arrangements to be conducted. And I think it's important for everybody to understand that the nature of the differences in terms of the management approach that we need to take in order to make it an effective working relationship. So I'll come back to what the specific recommendations are in a mo, but if I can just start by explaining some of the discussions required specific executive consideration, and I've highlighted with their own sort of headers where those decisions have been taken. So at the moment we have Wokingham have obviously confirmed the budget proposals through the heads of terms and the delegated authority for the traded services, which is good. It's good on a number of fronts. It obviously is a primary part of the cost mitigation that the overall project has been seeking. And then more recently, the West Berkshire Executive, which considered a range of topics, the recommendations of which were all approved, and that included the nature by which the traded services could progress. We are awaiting the topic to be considered by Bracknell, and obviously the importance that's been explained about the traded services. Obviously, as I say, it's a very effective part of the overall cost mitigation that we're all seeking to achieve, and that the inter-authority agreement sort of binds us together on this point of trying to do what's right for all three partners and making sure that we don't end up with any disproportionate or unnecessary costs. Moving through to the descriptions around some of the key risks. What I've tried to do is give a bit of summary detail about the composition and the nature of the Joint Management Board and what we seek to achieve sort of behind the scenes, and also how we work in terms of our oversight of operational risks that obviously the wider management team feed into us about. Inevitably, there are certain methodologies that we try and stick to, and I've included the sort of the basic matrix that we operate, and it will be, I'm sure, fairly common across the different authorities and different services that apply similar types of methodology. What's important is to understand the nature of the conversations and how they will need to change between having that kind of partnership approach and dealing with risk versus an existing or a continuing partnership approach for West Berkshire and Bracknell, and then how we dovetail that with a different, close but different relationship to the Wokingham client officer moving forward. And what's important is to explain to the existing management team how some of those subtle changes need to be reflected in the way that they conduct their business, and also then how they report it into the committee for the purposes of the future partnership discussions, and also then how we communicate to the client officer, who will then obviously subsequently report into our Wokingham partners in terms of management decisions and where there are risks that might include budget or operational delivery. So the subject headings, I've pulled out the more prominent elements. Financial management and budget setting is obviously something that we do quite regularly as part of the business as usual for the committee. And we've tried to make sure that all the different parameters that we have to consider about in financial management terms for the PPP are explained in here, so that we're being as open and transparent as we can about how we see that relationship moving forward, and also for Wokingham to have a level of confidence that the open and transparency starts from day one on exactly what they've asked for, what we've offered, and what has been agreed to be paid for. So all of those things can be out there in the open. The principles about how we will monitor it are all based on the sound principles that we've always had as part of the PPP, which is cost recovery. And none of those attitudes and approaches will change with any of these arrangements. The key issue is obviously on an annual basis, those elements that make up the costs of the PPP can vary, and that will inevitably lead to a conversation with colleagues in Wokingham about their budget setting process and what can be allocated where. Again, the principal key point here is making sure that the client officer who's attending these joint management board meetings in their specific agenda items can properly compute what it is that's being described to them in terms of operational demands, looking at where there might be things that are coming through and where there might be a need for a discussion back in the Wokingham governance arrangements to talk about budget and priorities and expectations, so that we can have, as I say, an open and free conversation about what's realistic to be delivered and where there might be some compromises required. I've talked a little bit about ICT, and again, really just highlighting the fact that inevitably in shared services, ICT has its challenges. We've operated across multiple platforms, and we remain in a place where we're trying to deal with the complexities of having different databases and data migration, and to make sure that wherever possible, the customer receives a good service. And I think we're all signed up to that, although the mechanisms by doing that will be slightly different. Traded services and the confirmation of those traded services will inevitably mean that there'll be data sharing agreements between organisations, and all of that will get wrapped up in the project governance that we've already got in train, and it's been alluded to in other conversations. So although very complex, the work is being done, and we will work as tirelessly as we can to make that as smooth a transition as possible. New burdens, I've identified this one, and it kind of comes off the back of a conversation with the wider management team, which is really, again, to just make sure that we understand the nature of the challenge that we all face, regulatory services, and the fact that new laws will come through, they always do, how we're going to respond to those new burdens. And again, reaffirming this position that we will have to have an open and honest and grown-up conversation between the partnership and the trade services agreement to make sure that if new things come along mid-year, how we're going to respond to that, how it's going to be reported, make sure the client officer understands it, and then takes that back to the appropriate executive members, chairman of the licensing committees, etc., so that the PPP is showing exactly what it can and can't do and what the implications of any of that might be. In terms of opportunities, I think it's fair to say that the inevitable changes in the composition of the demand profile, so the work that we're processing on a day-to-day, week-to-week basis, will change as a result of Wokingham having their own in-house service. And we need to be reflective of that. And we've started that process, and certainly, as is mentioned in the report, conversations being had now with members about where they see the priorities into the future and how that might shape the workforce strategy that we have moving into future years. And again, the ICT progress, what it will do is give us the ability to bring together data that we've been seeking to bring together for some years, and over the course of the next 12 months, we should see some definitive benefits for the customers, so the residents and the businesses, and also for officers in terms of internal efficiency. So they're two things that I think next year are going to be positives for the new shape of the partnership. In terms of organisational change, so again, that's describing the process of the structure and if you like, the human resources implications, which we've been reporting on. We've got to the stage now where the expressions of interest process is underway, which basically is the questions that were asked of the existing workforce and Wokingham's approach to populating their new structure under the title of enforcement and safety. And then that will conclude November 12th. And the idea being that once we know who is looking to move into one of those new roles, that the, if you like, the new PPP or the PPP Mark II, as we've sort of coined the phrase, so that we can establish, one, that we're making sure that we minimise costs, two, that we minimise obviously redundancies, because we don't want good members of staff to lose a job unnecessarily. So we'll be working through all of the complexities of that. And then to make sure that the traded services and our current vacancy listing are used to maximum effect to reduce the financial risk for everybody concerned. So they're the sort of motivations that are going through the project at the moment. So essentially, to conclude, the report is asking for the committee to approve the role of the JMB and its governance approach, which for those who weren't involved in the early phases, is essentially a restatement of the principles that we had when we set up the service around risk management, making sure that we take account of the impact of what we're doing, and a level of transparency about budget setting and cost recovery. So they are all founding principles of the PPP, and making sure that we carry that through in our new relationship with Wokingham in 22-23. And then to make sure that we're clear on the approach that we're going to be taking around financial management and budget setting, which, as I say, is really properly highlighting the importance of the Wokingham client officer role in attending the new agenda for the Joint Management Board, listening and evaluating the new risks and any new burdens that come through, and then reporting that back to Wokingham so that they feel that they've got a real handle on the issues that are being presented to them. I think that's my lot. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Do any members have any questions before we move to a vote? Yeah.
Chairman, thank you. I'd just like to say, really, thank you to Paul Anstey for the effort and the hard work that he's put in to getting us to this position. I think it's really important to acknowledge that because it's been very delicate and difficult negotiation for him, and I think we're coming out of it with both sides being happy with the arrangement going forward. And as Paula said, the client officer and management role will be absolutely key, and I think we need to emphasise that and reassure our colleagues in Wokingham that we are very, it's important to us to maintain that good service to you as our customer, for want of a better word. So I think we're working well towards it. And I'd just like to, again, say thank you to Paul for his efforts in this, because it's been tricky at times for him. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to second that. I think that's a very good statement about Paul's work on this. And actually, despite the swan-like serenity on the surface and the clarity with which he's put this together, I think there's been an awful lot of hard work going on under the waterline. So thank you and well done. And we've come up with a set of proposals that I think are going to work for everybody. So with no further delay, I shall propose the recommendations as set out on page 67. Do I have a seconder? Thank you. Do I have any against? Those in favour? Okay, that's carried. Thank you very much. Next item is item 8, the Air Quality Standards Status Report to 2020. Mr. Murphy.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I mean, Just before I go into the report in detail, I mean, we had really hoped to have had the response to the Bracknell Air Quality Status Report for this meeting, but as Moira has already indicated, we will bring that back to the first available meeting, hopefully the next meeting of this committee, once we've had the response to that. And certainly there's nothing to be read into that. I suspect it's just the order in which they're arriving back with us. But the contents of the status report was very much the formula that we used to develop the status report, would hopefully get us a very good evaluation for the Bracknell one as well in due course. So just moving on to the air quality status reports themselves. I mean, air quality is clearly one of the issues of our time. And there's very rarely a day goes by when there is not some aspects of discussion around air quality that's not in the news. But it has actually been a legal requirement of local authorities, so a duty on local authorities to look at this since 1995. So we've been around this subject basically as in our various guises as authorities for very many years. So the 1995 Environment Act set the framework for it, and then there are regulations basically under the Act which set what are known as the air quality objectives. So they stipulate things like concentrations of specific pollutants such as nitrogen dioxide and particulate matter such as PM10, and the fact that they shouldn't be exceeded over specific time periods of human exposure, such as, for example, a 1 hour time period or an annual mean for that time period. Now, going back to the role of the local authorities, I mean, as I say, in our various guises, we've been doing this work for very many years, and we have been monitoring local air quality in each of the local authority areas for over 20 years now. And we review our programme basically every year. For 2021, we have 4 continuous monitoring stations across the 3 authorities, but in addition to that, we have over 120 diffusion tube locations. So there is a fairly comprehensive network of monitoring taking place. Where there are exceedances of the air quality objectives, local authorities are legally required to declare air quality management areas and produce air quality action plans. And each of the 3 authorities has air quality management areas within their areas, and members will know where they are within the areas, but the details from the Public Protection website. On an annual basis, we're also required, each authority is also required to produce an annual status report. And this, as stated at section 4.3 of the report, requires us to report to DEFRA on our monitoring data, our progress on the actions in air quality action plans, and to consider the impacts of new developments. For the calendar year 2020, we can clearly see that the effects of on air quality by the pandemic, and this was discussed in the reports. The 3 annual status reports were submitted to DEFRA in advance of the deadline date. So far, as I've already alluded to, we've received feedback on 2 in the form of an appraisal report for West Berkshire and Wokingham. We have chased DEFRA on the Bracknell one. We expect it back very soon, and we will report that to the committee. For both West Berkshire and Wokingham, as you can see in the report, the feedback was very favourable, and that's detailed at section 8 and 9 of the report. I would also draw your attention to section 10, where PPP or the shared service basically were successful in being awarded a DEFRA grant on behalf of the 3 authorities. And this work has now commenced basically with the appointment of an air quality officer recruited to deliver these projects. And we should be in the process of starting PM 2.5 monitoring in the near future once the contractual arrangements in place to do so. There has been another round of funding announced by DEFRA. We have submitted a further application. I'll report on that basically to the committee in due course, should we be successful or otherwise for that. So I think overall, I think basically the feedback we've had is very positive. I think it's something that you know we've learnt over the years basically, and you know we've shared experience, and this is one of the areas I think actually from a shared service point of view where the shared experience of working across 3 authorities has been helpful. We've been able to try different things, look at what worked, look at how we can improve our plans, and look at how we can basically build those into the reporting that we do every year. So overall it's a positive report. I hope to come back, and I'm sure we will come back with a very positive outcome on the Bracknell status report in due course, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any questions on the report?
Yes, I have.
Councillor Mrs Cole and then Councillor Patman.
Thank you. It's a really comprehensive report, and the question I'm going to ask is, with regard to World Health Organization air pollution guidelines, you're aware that I'm asked several times at executive questions on these guidelines because they are different to the guidelines that we're working to at the moment. Is there a way, or are we can you tell me whether or not we'll eventually work towards these World Health Organization guidelines, which are different to the ones that we have with regard to particulates, PM 2.5 and nitrogen dioxide?
Yeah, I mean,
Thank you.
you're quite right. I mean, they have different levels prescribed in the WHO guidelines. I mean, currently, basically, what we're working to do is to get the air quality the best we can. But certainly, we are looking basically to keep that within the UK regulations. But the aim is always basically to get the levels of some of those pollutants like nitrogen dioxide. And obviously, at the moment, we've started a very big project around PM 2.5 and particulate monitoring, down to levels basically as low as we can and as close as we can to the WHO guidance. But ultimately, basically, the legal framework is built around the UK regulations. Councillor Cole.
Thank you.
Councillor Patman.
Thank you. Yes, I've certainly noticed in my area and other areas as well that COVID has had a significant impact on the amount of vehicles that are actually around. And obviously that makes it more difficult to make judgments about whether the actions that we're taking as opposed to actions that the public are taking make any difference to it from that point of view. And also, obviously, you've got the question of moving to electric vehicles and so forth coming along as well. Is that going to make life difficult in trying to make judgments about how effective the work we're doing is?
Yeah, I mean, clearly, Councillor, last year was an unusual year. And actually, one of the things we did do, and I forgot to say when I was actually presenting the report, is we made a conscious decision to continue to monitor throughout the entire period. So through all of the lockdowns and everything else, basically the diffusion tubes were placed, the analysis was done, and it has in many respects given us a picture of another kind of world, I suppose, in terms of air quality. I mean, clearly now the traffic is returning. This year will be interesting to see how it compares to last year as to how it compares to previous years. And motor cars aren't the only source of some of these pollutants. I mean, for example, PM 2.5, there are lots and lots of other sources of that as a pollutant, and there is lots of other work, as you know, that is going on to try and reduce some of that. So, for example, new regulations around things like wood that can be burnt and things like that. Yes, I mean, it will be fascinating, actually, I think, basically to see what this year looks like as compared to last year and what the trends are basically going forward. But clearly there has been a fair return of traffic to the roads. But then we have the longer term aims as well as you say, around things like moves to electric vehicles, reductions in the use of diesel, etc.
Thank you. Is anybody else? Councillor Soane.
Thank you. With the recent introduction of the fourth lane on the smart motorways, I hate to use the word smart motorway particularly, and we've got close proximity of some houses, certainly in the Wokingham area. Is there any monitoring to be taken place on those areas?
So my colleague Suzanne, who's the expert on this, I will take that away and ask that question. But I was aware that we were party to some, believe some of the monitoring while some of the works was going on. It's a really interesting point that you make, actually, about the impacts of that. And obviously under the new kind of arrangements going forward with Woking, and we are looking to do the monitoring anyway. So I will go and have that conversation with Suzanne to see whether there is anything we should be doing, having that discussion with your officers and with the relevant members. Councillor Soane.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Recommendations on page 77 are that we note the contents of the report and the two separate air quality annual status reports. And I'm I'm very pleased for the other two authorities, apart from Bracknell Forest, who've had theirs back. So hopefully we'll get a good report soon as well. To note the feedback from DEFRA where it exists, note the progress on the measures to improve air quality as set out in the reports, and approve the ongoing and planned future measures to improve air quality set out in each report. I'll move that. Do I have a seconder? Thank you. Councillor Cole. Those in favour, please show. Any against? That's unanimous. Thank you very much. So next, let's move on to item 9 is on fireworks. Operational approach, Mr. Murphy.
Chair, that's me again. This is only actually an information item. Now, the reason why this is before the committee is that obviously the issue of fireworks, and in particular noise related to fireworks, the effect on animals and such like, basically has become, I think, probably certainly become more of a kind of talking point, more of an issue in recent years. And in fact, actually, basically, the RSPCA have approached a number of local authorities, I think probably all the authorities around this table, around motions and things like that in relation to fireworks. What I wanted to do really today, what we wanted to do as a service today, was actually to say what we were already doing. So there are, we can only really operate within the framework of the law, and I think that was one of the issues that we had with the RSPCA motion. There was an element of that which was clearly around lobbying, but also basically there was elements of that we felt possibly weren't going to be enforceable within the current legal framework. So what I wanted to do really today, or what we wanted to do as a service, was just bring the committee basically a summary of the role that the service plays with respect to fireworks and the approach that we were taking to doing that. So you'll see there's very much an emphasis. I mean, there is an enforcement element around storage and sale and underage sales and all of that kind of stuff where we have statutory roles. And then there is basically an element of engagement, for example, with organisers around informing the public and also basically public engagement. And for those of us that follow us, for example, on social media and look at some of the stuff that we actually put out as a service, you will see some of that stuff actually basically now already in the public domain. So it's an information item. Basically, I'm happy to answer any questions, but we feel it represents a fairly comprehensive approach to dealing with the whole range of issues relating to the sale and use of fireworks.
Thank you. Do we have any questions? Councillor Hilary Cole.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to say this. We did have a motion to West Berkshire Council with regard to fireworks, which was promoted by the RSPCA. And as a result of that, we decided, certainly at West Berkshire, that an operational approach was the best thing to do, simply because, as Mr. Murphy said, we can only operate within the current framework, and some of what the motion was requesting was a bit too prescriptive. So I think what we've come up with this operational approach is to give members all the information that we can, so that when residents approach them, and I've had letters already about fireworks, we've got an answer for them, and we've produced a standard letter that we can give to members to send out to those concerned members of the public, because understandably people who have got pets do get concerned. Although I also have to say that with regard to domestic animals, it's very much down to the pet owner as well to accept some responsibility for ensuring the comfort and safety of their animals during firework displays that are local to them. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like then to thank Mr. Murphy for this briefing and yeah.
Sorry.
Oh, sorry, Rick. Sorry, Councillor Jones.
Just a quick one. Concurring with what Councillor Cole has just said, given that we established this position about a month or so ago, have we had any initial reaction to our position?
Well, we have actually basically already at a couple of occasions, basically kind of, so you'll see that the publicity within terms of the plan, the communication is already basically is underway, and that information is going out. And we are basically having discussions with event organisers. I can think of one even in the last week where we've encouraged the event organiser to have the conversation with the relevant local. In fact, in this case, I think it was a riding establishment where they had concerns, and we've asked them to talk to each other basically and try to come to some sort of position. So, and of course, we will invariably, I'm sure at some point, get some enforcement issues. We're carrying out test purchasing, as we always do around underage sales. So the plan is operational, and I do think it gives a kind of fairly comprehensive picture of really the approach that we are taking. I mean, the trends are changing all the time anyway. I mean, what we have noticed this year is, and we don't know whether it's a blip, but there's less premises registered to sell fireworks now than there were. And there is obviously there is a significant number, we know from the safety advisory group side of the work that we do, of organised events. So whether that's part of a longer term trend, I don't know. But at the moment, basically, we are implementing the operational approach as set out.
Thank you. Yes, I think it's quite important that we do have some clarity for residents and that members are able to explain what the issues are when it comes to any sort of enforcement. There we have limited powers, and it would need a change in legislation to do more of the things that were being asked of us by the RSPCA. So all the business is now being concluded, and thank you everybody for your attendance. And the next meeting will take place on 13th December in West Berkshire.